Installing ductwork is easier than installing refrigerant piping. So I'd like to go first on that. Having done both, it absolutely depends on the situation. We also have ducted equipment as well as multi-zone piping systems. So, it can absolutely just depend on the application. If you got a job where you're trying to find a chase to get to the second story, for example, having some 30 by 30 box, that kind of thing, people are losing square footage for their house now, and you might use a ductless unit instead. And it may be a lot easier to run a 1/4 and 3/8 line set, for example, than it would be to install, something that large. Or let's be honest, run of 16-inch flex duct up to the attic, which, might be what option that you choose. So it could definitely depend. Greg, what do you think?
In my opinion, running refrigerant lines would be easier because it takes up less space and you can get it in tighter quarters, and you can make, with the equipment that we offer, we got some pretty long line lengths we can reach as well. So you're not having to use larger ductwork. And in a ductwork situation, you have to use larger ductwork and maybe graduate it down to smaller ductwork, where with what we got, you're just doing one long refrigerant run, and that's going to be a lot easier than installing ductwork. Unless you're making joints in those refrigerant lines to make that long run, but you can buy pretty long runs of pipe without having to make joints, rarely are your leaks in the piping itself. So once that pipe's in place, you're done with it.
Right.
When you're talking about efficiencies to equipment, there's a lot of loss of efficiency through ducting that is not considered compared to using mini split type products, where you're using a wall mount, where you have no ductwork. The efficiency level off of that is extreme compared to having a ducted system. Now, we also have ducted units as well, but if you minimize the ductwork, so if you were using more slim ducts and with minimal ductwork to it, your loss through that is going to be less than having one large duct system. So
Right.
There's a lot of benefits to basically zoning by refrigerant and minimizing the losses through ductwork, whether you're still using ducted product or you're using non-ducted product, you're still increasing efficiency.
Right. Well, I mean, I think it's a good point, figuring in the duct loss like that. And I think Justin's made this point in the past, like the difference between SEER and SEER 2 and the like the M1 blower testing, that, changing the way that they would, like the AHRI push for something more realistic. I believe they went up to 0.5 inches of static, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it went from 0.1 to 0.5.
Well, yeah. So it went from 0.1 to 0.5. How many duct systems were at 0.1? Just the ones in the AHRI labs. How many of them are at 0.5? A whole hell of a lot of them. And so that actually gave us, if you look at the way the efficiencies were before versus the way the efficiencies were, the adjustments that the manufacturers had to do to their equipment to hit the new minimum efficiencies, a big chunk of that was just changing, having to change the efficiency rating of that piece of equipment because of duct loss. Right?
Yep.
So yeah, if you can eliminate the ducting, or you can shorten the ducting, or lessen the amount of ducting that you've got, the more efficiency that you're going to see, the more energy savings the customer is going to see. Because I mean, we all know, if I took a very nice 18 SEER 2 piece of equipment and I do some bad duct work on that piece of equipment, is the customer going to be saving a lot of money?
No.
Not as much as they could,
Right.
definitely not as much as they could. So I mean, it can be that you can use a bottom line style piece of equipment with a good duct system and get the same kind of power bill as you would have with a high efficiency system with bad duct work. I mean, we know that has been the lifeblood for equipment.
But that's also why the insulation classes to ductwork that's used in unconditioned spaces went way up too.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the loss through the ductwork and through the insulation and stuff like that. Not take away from the fact that we have to insulate refrigerant lines, but our refrigerant line, our thickness on the refrigerant lines, that classes went up too. So we don't get any loss through those refrigerant lines with that thick insulation on there.
Right.
But your loss through the refrigerant pipe is going to be minimal compared to what your loss through ductwork is. And then now that you're having to run ductwork with larger insulation on it, now you've just compacted the problem of getting the ductwork to fit into tighter spaces and stuff like that.
Right. Well, and there's also the additional testing and all the rest of the stuff that's been done, in some areas, blower door testing, all of that stuff, contributes to cost and time and effort and all the rest of that. I mean, in this case, if I've got a wall mount unit, it's rated at 12,000 BTUs. Am I getting 12,000 BTUs? Yeah, there's no reason why I shouldn't. If I've got a ducted system that's 12,000 BTUs or 36 or whatever it is, am I actually getting that capacity in that case? Maybe we're not always doing the math to determine whether or not you're actually getting the rated heat, heating or cooling capacity out of the system that you've put in. A lot of folks, not you guys, of course, you guys, are always getting training and stuff like that. But, the people that aren't listening to this right now, they might just be looking for a delta and calling it good.
Right.
Well, a delta at, 1200 CFM versus a delta at 1050 is not the same level of capacity, right? I mean, seems like that's just a basic capacity calculation.